And that really kind of solidified that direction for me, that as you advance as a yogi, it is physical, yes, but it can't be just that.
What is going on, yogis? Thank you for tuning in to Dharma Talk. This is episode number 18. And boy, I'm really pushing it this week. It is Wednesday night, and here I am burning the midnight oil to get this podcast episode polished, published, and ready to stream into your earpieces. But I do it for you because I love you, and I appreciate you coming back each and every week to join me for these conversations. This week is a special episode because this is the very first time that I'm interviewing a pair. I have two guests this week, so you got a twofer. These two travel together, teach together, do all their stuff together, so it's really a natural fit that they came on to share the mic. It's Ida Jo and Scott Lamps of Ghosh Yoga. These two have really kind of put the Ghosh Yoga College in Calcutta, India on the map for a lot of us modern-day yoga practitioners in the West. And they know a lot about the history, and that's something that we really talk about on this episode. They're not just practitioners, but actually historians or historiographers of yoga. And they've put together a number of resources, practical manuals, but also history resources for how this yoga came about and became popular in the U.S. So you're going to hear all about that on this episode. We talk about, first of all, how a traditional understanding of Dharma really contradicts with the American dream. But we also talk about how, you can reconcile those two things and try your best to live a yogic life in modern day. And we talk about their journey, how they stumbled into the historiography of yoga basically by accident, and then their journey to Calcutta, which paved the way for exploration and connection that neither Ida nor Scott had planned or expected. And then we talk about some of the things they learned there, what an individualized, prescribed approach to yoga really looks like, as opposed to what we do here normally, but how yoga teachers in the U.S. can apply that mentality, that modality, that approach to their group classes to maximum benefit. So I can't wait for you to hear all the wisdom from Ida and Scott. You're going to get into it right after these announcements. Yogis, on July 9th, that's less than 2 weeks away, we are kicking off the second advanced teacher training at Lighthouse Yoga School. I'm going to be assisting Jared McCann with this program, along with some of the rest of the staff of Lighthouse, and we would love to have you. If you've been sitting on the fence on this for financial reasons, get in touch with us. Send me a message, get in contact with Tony Lupinacci from Lighthouse, and let's talk, because at this point we've got a couple spots left and we're more interested in filling it up with good people and good energy than counting every last dollar. So we do have financial payment plans. We've got work study arrangements available. Don't let that be what stops you. Just put in an application, no commitment necessary, and write Henry Wins in the referral area, and you'll get a guaranteed 10% off of your tuition. Next, if you're not really interested in becoming a yoga teacher, you can still do the teacher training, but we also have another option for you, which is a 30-hour intensive over the Labor Day weekend. This one is 4 days of intense practice with posture clinics, yoga philosophy training, and lots of meditation as well. This is a great option if you don't want to make the time or financial investment of a teacher training, but you really want to deepen your practice. And then the last thing I want to share with you is also in July, in between the two modules of the teacher training, I'm going to be in Chicago for the We Are Yoga Waycation. It's taking place at 105F, Chicago's original hot yoga studio. But there are going to be yoga classes of all different styles, different teachers teaching all the different classes. And we're going to take excursions too, so it'll be fun. We've got Pitchfork Music Festival going on, Chicago Cubs games, if that appeals to you. So here's the deal. I've got a special 10% discount for you, my Dharma Talk listeners, my followers, for any or all of these three events. You can apply that 10% to your tuition for teacher training or the immersion, or a 4-day pass at 105F for the Chicago vacation. So to get that discount code and register for the events, head on over to henrywins.com/events. What's your purpose? What's your vision? What mark will you leave on this planet long after you're gone? I'm Henry Winslow, and you're listening to Dharma Talk, the only podcast where I interview inspirational yogis on how they're changing the world in their own unique ways. Whether you're still searching for your purpose or already walking the path, I hope these stories get you excited to live your Dharma. Hello, Dharma Talk community, and welcome back to another episode of Dharma Talk. Today, I've got Ida Jo and Scott Lamps on the show. Ida and Scott are Yoga Acharyas, or Masters of Yoga. They are perpetual students of the traditions, methods, and science of yoga, and they travel internationally to teach. They work closely with Ghosh's Yoga College in Kolkata, India, and have published 3 practice manuals describing more than 100 beginning, intermediate, and advanced asanas, pranayamas, and pratyahara techniques, plus an in-depth volume about modifying the 26 postures we know as Bikram Yoga. Their research, along with Jerome Armstrong into the history of the Ghosh lineage, has yielded 4 publications from Bishnu Ghosh, Dr. Gouri Shankar Mukerji, and Buddha Bose. Thank you guys so much for coming on. I'm excited to do my first interview with 2 guests together, so we'll see how this goes. How are you guys doing?
We're great.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Henry.
It's my pleasure, yeah. All right, well, if you've been listening to the show, then you might know that we start with the exact same question every time, and today's going to be no different. So that question is, what does the word Dharma mean to you, and what is your Dharma as you understand it today?
All right. Getting started with the big ones.
Yeah.
I think that that's a really interesting word, and I think it's really interesting how it has begun to be applied to like a modern society and especially American culture. I think of it in terms, to the best of my knowledge, as the kind of orthodox Hindu ways of living, the laws and the rights depending on, what caste you are and what system of life that you were brought up in. And, I know that it has like so many modern applications for the word, but I personally try to kind of think of it as it was intended and apply it to a study of the kind of history and philosophy of yoga. And so for that reason, it doesn't necessarily apply to me in my life personally. I know that it's, it has come to mean like the duties with which we carry out our work. But I don't really use that word when I think about my own life's work, because I try to, like I said, kind of study it in a very philosophical way and a very historical way. I don't think that it's, bad or wrong or whatever to apply that to our own life. But for me personally, it doesn't super resonate in that way. And I really like to try to study the history as kind of authentically as I can, if that's even possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I haven't heard that answer yet from any of the other guests, but I can't say that I'm totally surprised to hear that from you, knowing, where you situate yourself with the study of yoga. You guys are both historians, so I'm really looking forward to kind of getting your perspective on that. And I do respect the decision to sort of contextualize the language of history in its proper setting.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a tough, because obviously I think both of us really believe that yoga should evolve, and obviously it has evolved, especially in the past 100 years, quite drastically to be, a modern physical practice. So I try to really walk a fine line between letting that happen and letting it reach a lot of people. And I mean, not that I could control it anyway, but, really kind of doing my part in helping that happen, but also at the same context, providing some, just more historical information.
Well, yeah, because the thing that we find as we go out and we teach and as we study more is that the meaning of so many of these words, Dharma among them, we take them for granted now in the 21st century. We say like Dharma means X, and my teacher said that it meant this, and my teacher's teacher said that it meant exactly the same thing. But even that amount of lineage, like 2 generations or 3 generations of lineage, only takes us back to 1950 at the earliest. And the huge transformation that the meaning of these practices underwent in around 1900, like anywhere from 1850 to 1930 or so, like the meaning of these words and the philosophies had this huge transformation. And so what we think of as Dharma now, and what we think of even as like yoga now, that we have taken for granted for the last 50 years, is very different from if you look at texts from 200 years ago or 500 years ago or 2,000 years ago. And so it's a balancing act that we really try to perform. It ends up being like there is no one answer. And the more that we study and the more that we learn, it's like things don't get simpler, they get more complicated. And so we end up with the more you study, Dharma ends up having 5 meanings instead of just one. And the more you look into it, then like, oh, holy cow, here's a 6th completely independent meaning to the word. And we can't discount them because they were as valid at their time period as the ones that we hold now are valid for our time period.
And it's a really interesting mix of culture too. Like we were even talking the other day, the idea of the American dream and like what being an American is actually, in direct conflict with the idea of duty as it pertained to your gender and your caste,
I'll bite. Let's hear how so.
Yeah, well, I mean, here we have the idea that you can come from anywhere, and you can be anything. And that's what the America is, right?
It's like the greatest quality of this place.
Yeah, it's the land of opportunity. And if you think about like duty in the more historic context and the more orthodox Hindu context, it is very much the opposite, right? Like the Bhagavad Gita, the idea that you have to fight because that is your duty, even if you don't want to, right? And so I think that the play of those two things is really interesting. And then how we, as Westerners, incorporate these ideas of discipline and duty and work in a Western context is super fascinating. And I think it's great that you explore that idea as the first thing in your podcast, right? Like, what does this mean to you? Because like Scott was saying, it does have a lot of significant historic meaning. But, we've kind of put it in this culture where you can make your own duty, you can make your own work, you can make your own ideas about that. And that's a really fascinating mix of culture and history.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea of like, what does it mean to make your own Dharma or decide what that means for you? Like one of our teachers at the ashram when we studied just recently this past year, a Swami, when they talk about Dharma and duty, like Dharma is such an advanced concept in like yogic, like the earliest yogic texts, like the Vedas and stuff, that you can't, like a person can't really understand Dharma, and much less can you understand what your own duty is. And that's kind of what makes it duty, is that we don't understand it personally, and we just have to carry it out. Mm-hmm. And our teacher said that there are only 2 ways that you can understand your own Dharma, and both of them are rare. One is when you become fully realized, like a fully self-realized person can witness and understand their own Dharma. And I personally don't think that I am there yet. And the other person who can understand your Dharma is your guru, like a fully realized teacher of yours who can see you more clearly than you see yourself. But otherwise, otherwise they're just like any ideas of duty that we have for ourselves are generally just constructions of our own mind, and they're ideas that we have for ourselves. And in that way, they can actually be as detrimental as they are beneficial.
Yeah, I can see that. And, I think it's an interesting idea that we can be serving our purpose, serving our duty without necessarily knowing the ultimate outcome or even ultimately the path that we're on, because we're so ingrained in it ourselves, and an outside perspective might have a better sense of what we're doing than even we do ourselves. So, I can tell, even if, I mean, you guys probably know this too, but you don't want to use, inappropriate semantics. But I would say that you're doing a lot of great work right now to ask these kinds of questions and to reconcile the differences between yoga of the past, yoga of today, and find a way to merge those things in a way that serves our modern society. So I'll take you to kind of the next step in applying that Dharma and ask, what does your personal yoga practice look like? Because I can tell that it's definitely interwoven for you guys. So how has your yoga practice supported you in all of the good work that you're doing?
Oh my gosh. That's a great question. Well, it changes so much from time to time. And that's, I think, one of the scary things about it. And but it's also one of the things that's been really interesting for me personally. I started practicing the Bikram's class, and did that for many years, and then got interested in kind of the postures beyond that practice, and started practicing those. And then was really lucky to kind of start doing this work with the history and with the philosophy, and was just opened up to more study of yoga, and learning about it from different perspectives. And so now, in terms of actual practice, I do a lot of pranayama, a little bit of asana, and then some other fitness based stuff to kind of support that. But I would say that in general, my practice is more study, right? It's it's practice, but it's also complementing that with learning, and trying to give that equal footing as the physical practice itself. Because I think that's really, for me, that's been really, really important. And Scott mentioned this last year, we were able to study at the Shivananda ashram for a month. And that really kind of solidified that direction for me, that as you advance as a yogi, it is physical, yes, but it can't be just that. Because that, brings so many issues with the body and the self and how we perceive our practice. And so the complement of study and learning and the subtler practices is so important.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that as you start to try to answer some of these questions that come up, you don't get answers, you get more questions. So that's a natural course to take, is just to start getting more interested in the scholarly study. What does that look like? Are you reading texts? Are you meeting new teachers? How do you study yoga apart from the practice?
Yeah, the best way that I have found is to follow the curiosity. It started with the physical practice. I think most of us come in through the physical practice door or the meditation door. But then I got interested in anatomy, and so I started reading anatomy texts. I started taking anatomy courses. I started applying that to physical yoga practices and seeing the effects. And strangely, that led to physiology, where you start dealing with the nervous system and how the body's affected. And the parallels between the nervous system and the brain and pranayama and pratyahara practice are quite striking. And then when it comes to like philosophical study and historical study, we got into it totally by accident, a fluke and a stroke of luck, in which Jerome Armstrong, this man who discovered the missing Buddha Bose manuscript. I don't know if you or your listeners, you must know about it. Buddha Bose was a great yogi in the 1930s. He was the first great yoga student of Yogananda and Bishnu Ghosh. And in the late 1930s, they put a book together of 84 postures and 10 mudras, complete with big old pictures and explanations, instructions of how to do the postures. And from this big manuscript, they pared it down and they published a little tiny volume 1 that only had 24 postures in it. And so a handful of yogis in this lineage especially are aware of Buddha Bose's volume 1 publication, but his volume 2, his big manuscript, had never been published, and no one knew if it existed, including his own family members and his own students. And Jerome, who we happened to meet while we were studying with Tony Sanchez, Jerome has an uncanny ability to find things that have no business being found. Like he is an archaeologist of extraordinary skills. And one day he emailed us and he said, I think I found the Buddha Bose manuscript. And I think it took us several reads through of that to be like, wait a second, you're talking about something that's been missing for 75 years and none of us even knew it existed. And then when it turned out that he had found it, he really wanted to go to India, to Calcutta, and meet Buddha Bose's family, meet Ghosh's family, and do a tiny bit of research and recon before publishing the book. And he just wanted company. And so he asked us if we wanted to go, and it struck us as a remarkable once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And so we said yes before really thinking about it too hard. We were like, we just have to do it, and we'll make it happen. And then once you go to Calcutta, once you go to India, the place is so rich, and the place is so full of life and full of knowledge and spirit that from there we learned so much about Buddha Bose. We met the families of so many different yogis in this tradition, including Buddha, including Ghosh, including Gouri Shankar, who we met his nephew. Like, we're now kind of friends with his nephew. And that led us to stay with your question of like, how do you get into the history? Mm-hmm. Gouri Shankar's nephew permitted us to translate and publish a book that he had written about the 84 asanas. And he was a German doctor. And so the Buddha Bose project very directly led into another historical project. And, you start reading about these things, and every yogi mentions the Yoga Sutras. Every yogi mentions the Hatha Pradipika. And you start to I want to read these for myself, because everybody talks about them ever so slightly differently. And at some point for me, I thought, I just want to see what it actually says.
Yeah.
And then you find the text and you read what it actually says. And then to your point from a minute ago, that more exploration leads to more questions. You find that each translation of the Hatha Pradipika has a slightly different explanation, and there are different commentaries from different points in history, and
commentaries on the commentaries.
Right, exactly. And so that really leads. I find that stuff. I think we both find that stuff really interesting, and it does become a rabbit hole where you just like once you know one of the explanations and you find out that there's a different one, I kind of want to know what that is, just so I have better context. And especially because when you're a teacher, students bring up questions and they ask you things that you don't know. And students have different perspectives, and they have different, they come from different places. And so as a teacher, having the greatest amount of, like, you want to be able to say, when a student says, like, I read this in this translation, you want to be able to say, I know what you're talking about, and this is how to think about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make. Is, if you intend to come from a place of authority, you should be, well-read, well-researched, and not just go with the first thing that you see. You kind of need to survey the options and know what resonates with you. And I think that applies not only to yoga texts, but anything that you intend to, feel strongly and feel confidently about.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
But, apart from reading all the different texts and learning from the different interpreters and scholars of yoga, I think there's a big difference between doing that, the secondary research, and actually going out to India and meeting with these families. That's a powerful experience. Can you talk a little bit more about what that was like for you?
Yeah, for sure. It was really life-changing. And I don't say that lightly, because I think it's something we can, throw around kind of easily. Like, that was transformative. That changed my life. But this really was. And the first trip that we went to India with Jerome, I think we were just open to anything. Like, I hadn't been to a place like that before in my life, and I didn't know what was going to happen. We were basically showing up in Calcutta with this manuscript and trying to, like, knock on the doors of Buddha Bose's family and see if they would, A, open the door, B, let us in, and C, be okay with the fact that we had this thing that they probably didn't about their own family member. And so it was very strange and exciting and interesting. And that the first trip that we were there just kind of flew by, because we were in Calcutta, which is a very overwhelming place to be. And we were carrying out this very, like, strange task of trying to put this project together.
Before you go on,
yeah.
So I take it that Jerome did not get the manuscript by way of the family. If you had reason to believe that they might not even believe it was real, or that it was somehow, falsified.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened was, he, through a lot of internet research and internet searches, found reference to it in the States. And it had actually been sold at an art auction in the early 90s, 80s or 90s. So a couple decades ago. And he didn't know for sure that this is what the internet search was referring to. It was just talking about, like a man in yoga postures and things like that. But the timeline kind of matched up in terms of when they were saying the photos were taken. And so he actually traced the manuscript to Connecticut, where an art historian had bought the manuscripts, because all of the photos were very historic and very valuable. And so because Jerome lives on the East Coast, he was like, hey, can I contact this guy and maybe he'll let me see it? And so he did that, and he ended up driving to Connecticut. And sure enough, this man has had for decades this manuscript from Buddha Bose that even Buddha Bose's family didn't know existed.
Right, and the art collector probably had no idea of the significance of it or who this person was. And it took, the connection of someone who had a little bit of the knowledge of that history to be able to actually identify it.
For sure, exactly. And what was very lucky is that particular man was very open to it being published, so that it could be kind of shared with people. And in time, much of the family of Buddha Bose became very interested in it being published, and even one of Buddha Bose's grandsons helped a lot with the publication, which was really special. It's a difficult thing to kind of walk into somebody's house and their family and their culture and be an outsider and have those conversations.
Yeah.
But over time, we've developed really close relationships with a lot of people in Calcutta, and it's been really special, I think, for me, especially because I've been going back twice a year since that happened a few years ago. I'm working really closely with Muktamala Mitra, who's the granddaughter of Bishnu Ghosh and who runs Ghosh College. And so I've been able to help them maintain a teacher training program for Westerners to go and actually live at Ghosh College and really be immersed in the culture and the neighborhood and the way in which they teach yoga there, which is very different than what we do here. So it has been a wild ride to say the least.
And turned into sort of a different whole thing, a different opportunity than you had anticipated going over there.
Absolutely. When I think of what we were, who we were, what we were doing at that point, it seems like such babies. I guess this goes on for the rest of your life every time you kind of look back at what you were doing. But I mean, we just liked to practice and we were curious about it. And I think the reason we jumped at going the first time was because we thought literally it would be a once in a lifetime opportunity. Well, we want to go to India. We hope to at some day. So we might as well just do it now because we have a good opportunity. Mm-hmm. And then we had no idea at that point that we would be back 6 months later and 3 months after that and 6 months after that, that this was just going to be the first of many trips and many relationships. And it's really spread in a beautiful way.
That really is beautiful. I mean, you never know what sort of doors will open when you just say yes to an opportunity that feels a little bit mysterious.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this was, for me, such proof of that. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's just, you had no idea. And to what we've been able to see and do and live at Ghosh College. And I know the woman that sells water in North Calcutta. We don't speak the same language, but we know each other.
Yeah.
We're happy to see each other and to know my way around the North Calcutta neighborhood and be able to tell the taxi drivers they're not going the right way. It's hysterical. I just have to laugh because it's such a foreign place and it's become really familiar in a really cool way. I never thought it would happen.
So you guys have the multiple historical projects going on. You've released several volumes, and you're also doing this work with the Ghosh College. My understanding of what the work is that's happening over there is it's a bit more medicinal and therapeutic than the yoga that we typically practice over here in the U.S. But I'd love to hear your take on what the unique, proposition of the Ghosh College is and why someone from the U.S. might be interested in going over there.
Sure, yeah. So what they've always taught at Ghosh College is a therapeutic kind of individualized way of doing yoga. And most of it is very, very simple. There's just very simple movement-based exercises that we now kind of have as physical therapy, or we think of as physical therapy. And then a couple of simple asanas that people practice. And if you were a patient or a student, you would go into Ghosh College or a different institution, and you would actually meet with the instructor, the educator, and you would be given a very specific set of practices. So it would be completely unique to you based on what issues you have. Say you don't sleep very well and your right hip bothers you, but besides that, you're healthy. So somebody would give you exercises that would help you sleep ideally, but wouldn't aggravate your hip or, whatever it is. And you would practice those to really specifically target what you need. And it's a really fascinating way of looking at yoga because it's very simple And there, of course, there have been over time, there have been great yogis that did very advanced and difficult postures, difficult practices, but those were really done for show and to kind of gain interest in the college. And then normal would come to the college and then they would get these yoga prescriptions. And those, again, would be very simple. So from a Western perspective, it's really interesting to learn about that and to see that, because we have this group mentality, right? Like a yoga class here is so different. Everybody does the same thing. It's actually quite challenging physically compared to what they do in India. And regardless of whether that's a way in which you're interested in teaching, it opens your mind. Just like we were saying with the texts, it's just a completely different way to approach it. And for that reason, it's really enlightening, because you then have to kind of juggle that with what you do, with what you see, with what other people do here, and figure out, like what you think is best and what works and what you want to teach your students if you're a teacher. And it just gives you another perspective, another tool in your tool belt.
Can I jump in?
Please do.
I remember when we went to Calcutta, it was the second time, I think, and when we studied the therapeutic yoga at the Ghosh College. And I remember the paradigm shift in my mind being quite significant, because as a Western yoga teacher, I went over there thinking of yoga as like a series of postures, or like there are these 20 to 50, maybe 100 positions that everybody should do, or this is what yoga is. And the students, there's not really such thing as a student. It's really more of a class. You show up as a teacher and there are 5 to 50 people in your class, and you kind of address the classroom and you guide them through either a set series or whatever you have decided for that day. And the relationship between the teacher and the yoga and the students is very specific in the West. Hopefully I'll make this clearer. So when we go over to India and we studied the therapeutic, like the individualized prescriptive yoga, we broke down every single posture, and it's like, these are what the posture does. These are the benefits of it. But importantly, every single posture also has contraindications, like things that if you have this condition, like if you have high blood pressure, or if you have spinal issues, or if you have any sort of ailment, like there are certain postures that you should not do. And as you start to learn these contraindications about each posture, as you start to learn the ins and outs generally of like the ailments people have and what they should avoid and what they should be doing, I remember my perspective of the practice and teaching shift so dramatically, because then it became like each student literally is their own universe, and everybody has their own strengths. They have their own weaknesses. They have what they need to work on. They have what they need to avoid. And that little set of things dictates what their practice should be. And that is completely a different universe from the person standing next to them. And so a room full of 20 people is no longer a class of people, like a classroom. This is now 20 individual students. And that is how I've seen it ever since we got back. But I remember that when I first went over there, that wasn't how my brain worked.
So how do you take that new information, that new perspective, and still come in and deliver a class that, is helpful and beneficial to a large group of diverse people?
Yeah, I mean, that's totally the trick, right? And at first it was almost like, I don't know if I can teach anything, right? Because now I have this other idea about how it should be done, and it conflicts, or it seems to conflict with how things are being done. And so you just are kind of like deer in headlights. I don't like, what can I possibly give to somebody? What can I possibly teach? But, there are generally practices and postures and breathing exercises that are good for most people. Mm-hmm. And so if that's kind of your starting point, right? And I think hopefully that's what a lot of yoga classes are in general, are like pretty good for most people. And when we have more time with people, which we're really lucky to be able to do, like even workshops, which are several hours long instead of, an hour yoga class or whatever it might be, or we do like longer weeks. And in those situations, we're able to kind of zero in, like we start from sort of a level playing field. Okay, everybody, this is kind of a general practice, but then we really try to encourage students to go in slightly different directions. More therapeutic when someone has an injury, and more challenging when somebody's, can probably take on a different posture or different variation that suits them. And we try to really encourage that, and also teach specific classes or specific workshops that have a focus. Like this is for back pain. And so come if you have back pain, and then we try to address it in that way, which even that, is complicated. Again, the more you do, the more there is to do, the more there is to know. But we try to just not be afraid to let people go in different directions, I think is the best way to think about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a smart way to kind of take one of the core values of what you learned over in Calcutta and apply it at the scale and in the context of yoga studios in the US. You took this idea of solving or providing relief to a specific ailment and then attract the students who are looking for that, rather than just say, this is yoga. If you like yoga, come do this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing when we pretty much without fail, no matter what city we're in, no matter where in the country or the world or wherever, we will have like several workshops that we offer, and there will be what the studio thinks will do well, that what people will come to. Maybe it's advanced, maybe it's a kind of Bikram style workshop, whatever. And without fail, back pain is always the biggest class. Seriously. And it's what's so interesting is it's also, I would say, the most rewarding, because when you can have somebody come up to you and say like, wow, I could tie my shoes after I left the class and I couldn't before. Or, if you see somebody the next day and they're like, I could get out of bed in the morning, like that means the world, because this like
it
basic,
made a difference.
Yeah, it made a difference. These are basic things that people are living with that cause them so much pain and frustration. And if you can help even just a little bit with that, it's really rewarding as a teacher.
Yeah. I've got two follow-ups. One, to kind of backtrack a little bit, when you were talking about people coming in and getting a personalized prescription. I'm curious, is that limited to, physical health, or do people come in and say, I can't hold down a job, or, I can't find a partner? Like, is that sort of thing that people come to Ghosh for, or traditionally came to Ghosh for, or is it specifically like a replacement for the doctor?
That's such a good question. I would say it's mostly for the doctor type, physical things, but there's definitely an element of high stress, fatigue, concentration, focus. And for those things, there are a lot of like breathing exercises or pranayama techniques that people would then practice. Right. But it's
I don't know of
mostly physical.
Any like lifestyle kind of therapies.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a good idea.
Well, the reason I ask is because anyone who's practiced yoga for a significant period of time realizes that, there's more to the benefits than the physical stuff. You start to, get the clarity in your mind, and, there are even psycho-spiritual benefits. So
absolutely.
But many of us, at the same time, what attracts us to yoga in the first place is the physical side. So it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's the type of thing that yeah, it could be developed with the right people, but for the most part, people are just, have poor digestion and can't sleep.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what yoga has come to mean in our culture too, is it's so physical.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more so, it seems. Now yoga studios are aerobics classes and Pilates classes and high intensity interval training and stuff like that. And that's becoming intermingled with yoga.
Yeah.
But if you're into that stuff, you should really pursue that. That's a really fascinating idea.
Yeah, because there are people, like yourself that are doing great work to continue to expand the conversation, I'll say, that have practices that have evolved past purely physical. And it's super interesting for people like you and teachers to explore that and teach that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know you guys are the same, cut from the same cloth. I'd like to hear another story now, because we've been talking about a lot of this, like, really, I don't know, optimistic is the wrong word, really like powerful moments of change for you that you've appreciated. But I know it hasn't always been sunshine and rainbows. There's been some challenges along the way. So can you take us to a moment where you hit a wall, either with one of your research projects or with your teaching, and then what did you do to get through that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
A couple years ago, Yoga Journal was looking for a duo to travel around the country and like interview yoga teachers and go to yoga studios and kind of report back via social media and a blog and stuff like that. It was going to be like a yoga lifestyle kind of thing. And it was going to be a year long. You got to travel everywhere. You got to meet people in the yoga community. And we thought we were perfect for that because there are two of us already, and because we were pretty proficient yogis. We were experienced travelers. We were actually had a good amount of writing experience. And so we contacted them, like we did the application, and they very, very quickly replied to us, and they were like, we think you guys are the ones. We need you to, we had a phone interview or two, and then they were like, okay, we're going to bring you up to Boulder. Was it Boulder? Somewhere in Colorado where their headquarters is. And so you can meet the team, and then we'll put it all in place. And so we were just super excited. We like cleared our schedule for the next year or whatever it was. And as the date got closer that we were supposed to fly out to Colorado, they got slower and slower in returning our emails, and to the point where the point came when we were like, hey, is everything okay? This doesn't seem right. And then till one day they dropped the bomb on us that another duo had appeared that also had videography experience, because we were going to have to tour around the country with a separate videographer to capture it. And this duo had the capability to also video themselves. And so we had been essentially dropped from the running. And that was a bad day.
Yeah. Because you had been planning on it for some time at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it just was made out to be that all that was left was kind of the technical stuff, but all the technicalities. But we were for sure the ones for the job, which is just a good lesson in it's never over till it's over. Because we kind of assumed that was the case, and it was one of those moments that was such a letdown and so disappointing. But there was nothing to do but just try to get over that and think about what would be next, because now we had all that time, and we had all of this space to kind of do something different. But it was very disappointing.
Yeah, because we were convinced that it was the next step for us, and it was going to be a platform to the next level, and it was going to be a new set of connections, and like we're going to meet everybody, and we were really excited and confident that this was like a huge step forward for us. And then it pretty quickly the rug got pulled out from under us.
Mm-hmm. So then when you did have that whole, you had planned a year for that, right? So
Yep.
what did you do with that year when suddenly your plans were pulled out from underneath you?
We were like, you know what? If there's no structure, we're not answering to anybody. We can do anything we want. Like, what do we think is missing? What do we want to provide for people? Well, what is there that can give great benefit to the yoga community, to practitioners? And so we really tried to tease out the answers to those questions. And I think it was also a little bit because we were so disappointed that we really wanted to come up with something that was like, just so good. Um, and so we had that kind of drive behind us. And so what we did, and it's something we continue to do, is we were really inspired by the fact that anytime you're an advancing yogi and you've practiced and you want to learn more, or you want to do more, you want to experience more, you have to take a teacher training, right? Like that's like what the continuing education for a yoga person is teacher training. And we're like, not everybody wants to be a teacher. And especially now, the more that we teach, they become more separate. Like teaching is one thing, but being a practitioner is another thing, and both need to be cultivated. And so we decided to offer something called Practice Week, which is just practice. And there are definitely some people that do things like that. Like Isaac Garcia has done his Jedi Fight Club, and people get together and practice. But we wanted it to not necessarily be really advanced, but just to be for people that were, pretty committed to practicing yoga, to come and learn more and offer history, offer philosophy, offer pranayama. Again, like have some idea of the structure, but let it be kind of organic depending on that, again, that individualized context, like whatever people are interested in and where their practice is at. And so that after getting turned down by the Yoga Journal job, we several months later offered something we called Practice Week. And it was kind of to prove to ourselves that we could do we could do something even though we were turned down by that job. So we put it out there, and we were like, probably 0 people will sign up for this. And that's fine. Like if 0 people sign up for us, either we'll just practice for a week or we'll do something else. And then like a couple people signed up for it, and we were like, holy crap, I guess we're going to do this. And that was kind of the beginning of our teaching in a lot of ways, that it was like, well, there's this community building that are interested in other things and interested in continuing their practice. And that's the community that like we kind of associate ourselves in. And I think just by opening ourselves up to that, we've been able to find that community a little bit. And that's really meaningful to us because, we've been able to meet a lot of people. And just like the Yoga Journal job, we've been able to travel, we've been able to meet people, but it's been a little bit more on, I guess I'll say, our terms, or things that we're really interested in. And so it has definitely all worked out.
Yeah. And you mentioned other people have done this before. This isn't like this brand new novel idea, but even so, when Isaac Garcia does it, it's different from when you do it. He's teaching different things. He appeals to different people. And I think that's an important thing to embrace. We're all, all of us, we're all yoga teachers. That doesn't mean that we're offering the exact same thing. And for you guys to create this program and offer something to a specific group of people that are attracted to what you have to teach, all the philosophy, all the history, that is something that's brand new, that didn't exist before. So I think you can feel very good about that.
Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to one more question before the prana round. So the last question that I'm going to ask you is, apart from getting your message out on this podcast today, what are you doing to live your Dharma?
I think for me, it's continuing to walk the walk myself. I mean, I really feel that the teaching or being out there publicly in any way only comes from my own experience and my own practice. And I can only teach what I know, and I can only share, my own experiences. And I think in order to lead students, you have to have been to those places yourself. And you have to be kind of beyond those places in some ways in your own teaching. Otherwise, you can't effectively make sense of the practices for people. And so I really strive to be a better teacher by being a better practitioner, or just a more experienced practitioner, to keep with it, which is really where the discipline comes in, because it's not always easy. It's not always what I want to do, but to stay with it and develop my own practice and my own relationship to the yoga. And then from there, decide, what I think is important for people to know, and what I see is lacking from people's own practices or their own body or their own life. And if at that point I can offer anything that will be helpful to them.
Yeah, I would say I am seeking my Dharma, if that's a thing, if that makes any sense. I don't claim to know what my purpose is or what my duty is. And at this point, the only thing I can do is follow my curiosity and follow the instructions of the teachers that I respect. And my hope is, and my belief is that one day, and I think that it's still going to be 20 years from now, perhaps my Dharma will be revealed to me, my purpose in this life, that I'll be able to see it, but I don't claim that I have that ability today. And so all I can do is study the things that I'm interested in. And I guess I do feel a responsibility to teach, to tell people some things. Because I'm sure you guys all have this experience. When you learn things, and when you, through your practice, you stumble across, you make these discoveries in yourself about the nature of the mind, or about the nature of your relationship with life. It does feel important to share them, because so many people don't seem to have access to these, and it becomes almost vital to share them if possible. I think it's a slippery slope, because it can become egocentric really easily. I realize when I say that, it sounds like I know this and no one else knows this, which is not the same thing.
No, I understand what you mean. And I think everybody has something to share with one another. It's not like you're the teacher, I'm the student. We all exchange these roles at any given time. And yeah, if you come across something, if you discover something, it does feel good. It feels like a service to be able to share it. So I definitely appreciate everything you just said. And I also appreciate, this idea that years down the line, when you can look back, hindsight is 2020. That's when you're gonna know what the impact that you made was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that it's important. As a yogi, the more that I understand about the path of yoga, is I actually think that I don't think that we should be. I'll speak for myself. I don't think I need to be worried about what my impact is. And I don't think I need to worry about who I'm affecting and how great of an impact I'm having, because that so quickly leads to, in yogic terms, a sense of I-ness. That I know this, and I am creating this, and I am affecting these people. And I know this is strangely esoteric, but for me, the practice of yoga is removing, as much as possible, removing those constructs and removing those concepts of myself. And when I find myself thinking what do I want to do in the world, and what change can I create, I have to recognize in myself that I am creating those ideas of self, and I'm even separating myself from others in order to effect change upon them. And I am separating myself from the world in order to affect it. And in my understanding of the practices of yoga, those mental habits need to be explored. And it's more important for me to explore those within myself than it is for me to do something like affect change in the world.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of happen. I think they happen synonymously, but as a yoga practitioner, I feel that same way too. Like when you say, I want to do this, well, like, what do you mean by I? And why does that I want it? Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like those are the subtler practices. And I think, of course there are, like you're saying, of course there is action that comes from that. Of course there is change that comes from that. Of course, maybe those things affect other people, but, as a yoga, as a yoga practitioner, as a yogi trying to look at those things, those become more and more the questions, I think.
You can't talk about affecting change without also recognizing that the idea of affecting change is a completely anti-yogic idea. And it doesn't make one better than the other, but I think that you have to hold them both in your hand at the same time so that you don't get carried away with one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Good questions to be asking, for sure. And I think it ultimately comes down to intention and constant self-inquiry. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you try to hold those things and then you look at what's happening kind of beyond that, it's almost like you have to live in two worlds, I think. Like there's this world of constant self-inquiry, and then there's this human world, right? Where like,
Right.
well,
Exactly.
You have to make a living, you have to do something with your time. That's just what this human world is. And so you sort of have to navigate both of those.
Okay, well, now seems as good a time as any to move on to what I call the prana round. So this will be a little different since we've got two of you here. I guess I'll have you both answer, but I have 6 rapid fire questions, and I ask you to answer in minimum 1 word, maximum 1 sentence. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. First of all, in 1 word, why do you practice yoga?
Clarity.
Spirit.
Clarity and spirit. Okay. What's your favorite yoga pose and why?
High lunge, because of the release in the hip flexors.
Samasana, which is just a medium level cross-legged position, because that is the position in which I do all my pranayama and meditation.
Aha, tricky answer. I like that. Okay. What's the single best cue or piece of advice you've ever received from a teacher?
I know this one. Tony Sanchez told us, the advice was like 1 sentence only. Tony Sanchez told us, as you practice, there are things that you've been practicing your whole life that you will have to leave behind, and you need to find new practices. He said, this is called progress.
Mine is relax your face.
I like that one too. I like relax your face. Okay. Recommend 1 book, modern or ancient, for our audience. Obviously, outside of all of your books, which I will link in the show notes.
Okay. I'm going to go with The Untethered Soul.
Michael Singer, right?
Yep. Yeah. It's a little outside classical yoga, but I think it's a good way in for people.
Mm-hmm.
From Science to God, and I can't recall the name of the author.
We'll find it.
Yeah.
Okay. Is yoga for everyone?
Some version of it is.
I agree.
Agreed? Okay. Last question. How can our audience get in touch with you, and how can we support you in your work?
Well, we would like to support all of you guys in your work, first of all, but more about what we're doing at ghosyoga.org, GHOSH yoga.org, and social media at Ghosh Yoga.
Yeah, and please do not try to support us in our work. The best way you can support us is by practicing. Yeah. Do not direct your energy toward us. Direct your energy toward your own practice.
Awesome. I love it. Scott, Ida, it's been a pleasure to have you guys on. I learned a lot. I think our listeners will have learned a lot too. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Henry, for doing this and all your work. You're really such a leader and inspiration to a lot of people. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Henry.
If you got something out of this episode, if you like Dharma Talk and want to keep it going, please do me a huge favor and subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. I know it's not the most convenient thing to do, but it makes all the difference in getting the show out there and more visible to other people who can benefit from it. And hey, if you've got feedback or ideas or you want to get in touch with me, you can do that on Instagram at HenryWins. Otherwise, I'll talk to you next week. And until then, keep living your Dharma.